And now it is my honor and privilege, and quite serendipitous, that I get to introduce our speaker today. As you'll read in the foreword that I penned in our Women's Council special edition of West Point Women, things happen for a reason. Sarah is here for a reason today. Sarah is an author, speaker, consultant, and executive coach. As a speaker, her audiences range from 20 to 100,000. As a consultant, Sarah has worked in the financial and energy sectors of government institutions to develop strategic change management plans and tactics. She's also coached hundreds of individuals to achieve more excellent performance and autonomy. She holds a bachelor's degree in engineering, general engineering rather, from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and a master's degree in organizational management and development from Fielding Graduate University. She's a John Maxwell certified speaker and coach and a National Speakers Association professional speaker. In 2014, she married Reed, her amazing husband, even though he's a Navy guy. Sorry, I'm going to say this, go Navy. I'm a Navy brat, I had to go there. In 2015, they moved to Louisville and quickly adapted to bluegrass country. On a trip to see a daughter, they fell in love with the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Who wouldn't? They purchased a lot and recently completed a lake house where their large family can congregate and enjoy the outdoors. Sarah attempts to defy her age from time to time by hiking, biking, kayaking, and boating with her adult children. As a master storyteller in her book, West Point Woman, Sarah describes her experience as one of the first women to graduate the academy through powerful and often humorous personal stories while teaching readers how to cultivate their character within. Today, Sarah will share with you her press-on methodology for overcoming crisis and challenges. Please give a warm welcome to my inspiration, Ms. Sarah Peticha. I'm on or not? Okay, all right. I just have to do this. All right. Well, I am so delighted to be here. It's been a 2-year process for me to appear in person with you, so I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and I've been treated so royally. I do speak, and sometimes, I'm just been very honored for the reception that I've received, and afterwards, I will be willing to sign your book, so please stay around for that. And I want to welcome those that are listening to this remotely. I know that there are some women that I was hoping that would be here and could not be because I'm going to be highlighting them today. So I just want to say hello to all of you out there. I wanted to begin by sharing a little bit about myself and give you some pictures that aren't included in the book. And I'm going to give you a little test here. Do you think you can identify in the bottom right picture who I might be? The shortest one, exactly. So attending the academy when I did, there had never been women at West Point, and so I was in the 4th graduating class of women. And so for 200 years, there weren't women. And so the faculty, many of our classmates, male classmates, they made it very clear they did not want us here. And I'm actually in trouble. That's why I'm in this picture. I'm standing before we're in a formation, and then we have to go sit in our rooms because I failed to mark my card. And so you had to put where you're supposed to be, and I guess I forgot. I was a upperclassman at the time, a first classman, and my future husband at the time was a classmate, and he's taking this picture and he's saying, there's my wife, she's in trouble, my future wife, and she can't go with me to the Diamond District in New York City to actually find our engagement ring. So he had to do that himself because I'm in trouble. So that kind of gives you it. I mentioned that I'm pretty short to show that I also didn't get to see a lot of parades. Because we line up by height, right? If you're taller than the man in front of you, move forward. And of course, I knew where to move back. And so this other picture, I am what we call a firstie, first classman, and I'm actually watching the parade. I'm watching a parade for the first time. The first 3 years at West Point I didn't. And so true story, come back to West Point for a reunion 20 years later. I'm mingling with my classmates, catching up. They line us up by height. I don't see that parade either. So some things don't change, you know. So I wanted to kind of emphasize that we were cutting edge, like many of you women, that there were so few of us, and each year there seemed to be less and less. In fact, my class had the lowest graduation rate of women in the history of women at West Point. And so I know what isolation is. I know what it is to be ostracized. I know what it is to come up against a lot of difficulty. And I think many of us have been experiencing that for the last almost 2 years now, right? So some of the things that women have experienced in COVID, I think, pertain to what you're trying to accomplish with this amazing council. Do you know that women are twice as likely vulnerable to lose their jobs as a result of COVID? It tells you something right there. And I know of people in this industry who have definitely lost a job or had to reinvent themselves. And a quarter of the women consider downshifting as a result of COVID, more so than men. That is really pertaining to women with kids that are 10 years old or younger. Many of you have probably had to deal with trying to homeschool while doing your job remotely. Very, very challenging, and that's caused a lot of people to think, do I want to keep doing this, or should I do something else? And for our African American sisters that are in the room, you're 3 times more likely to have lost a loved one. And having been widowed myself at a young age, I can only imagine how challenging that would be to not necessarily be able to have the funeral that you wanted or actually see a loved one before they passed away. So I can imagine that there's been things that African American women in this room have experienced. But as a result, women are feeling exhausted, burned out, and overwhelmed, what I like to call pressed. And that can lead to depression. It can lead to all kinds of physical and mental stress that you might have to endure. And what I'd like to do is kind of share some of the stories of 4 AVIXA women that I had the opportunity to interview in preparation for this talk. And each of them experienced different kind of challenges having related to COVID, but they coped in many unique ways. And some of them experienced more extreme things compared to others, but they all have an interesting story that fits really well in with my methodology, that is, press on. When I talked to these women, I kind of collated what were the commonalities that I heard from them. And I wondered as I go through this list if this resonates with any of you, you know, raise your hand. But several of them were in sales in the industry, and they lost many of their clients. Has that been something that's been constant for some of you? And also many of them were on the road quite a bit, and then all of a sudden they're forced to work from home and they're isolated. That feeling of loneliness, that feeling of not having that connection that they were used to. Many of them experienced a lot of stress because maybe there were things going on in their organizations that made them feel like they had to walk on eggshells all the time. They didn't know if they were going to have a job or not. And one of all the people that I'll talk about, she actually experienced a divorce during this time, a very painful thing. And most of them had to do some deep soul searching and had to force themselves to create new services or new ways of doing business, selling without that personal touch. One of them had a major life change in the birth of a baby during a pandemic, which could be both wonderful and incredibly stressful. And most were Zoomed, so they'd done so many Zoom video conferencing that they were Zoomed out. And finally, we have one member that lost a job. So these are significant things that would cause people to feel incredibly pressured, right? And so what I wanted to share with you is that there is this tendency that we sometimes miss to learn from the world around us and put into perspective what we're going through. And I came across an article about what vintners, those people that care for vineyards, really look for when producing lots of grapes and eventually wine. And I thought it was very interesting that they don't select really rich soil. If they do, the vines will grow up and they'll produce a lot of leaves, but not many grapes. So what do they look for? They look for nutrient-deprived soil without a lot of water. They want to have a lot of rocks because it forces those roots to go very, very deep. Go into the ground, sometimes as far as 20 feet deep, to find their nutrients. And then they bunch them together on top of each other and they prune them harshly. And they fertilize with manure. Now, some of us who have been through some things during COVID could say, I could kind of relate to that. I've been bunched together. I've had deprivation of some type, whether it's lacking of seeing and connecting with others, or maybe there's been a lot of uncertainty in terms of my finances. All those things happened, all right? But here's what they discovered. So once they cultivate the grapes, they put it in a wine press. So the pressure continues, right? And then they bottle it and ferment it. And maybe some of you have been around like I've been. I just celebrated a very significant birthday. We've been around a while. We've had some compression going on in our lives. And what they find, that grapes that have that kind of situation where it's been very poor nutrients, the most challenging of circumstances, produce the most bold, vibrant, interesting, and complex flavors. So I want to challenge you at the beginning of this talk is to think about the difficulties that you may be facing or will face in the future and allow them to make you better, not bitter, by going deeper and allowing them to form your character, because it's from there that you can face whatever challenge is coming. And one woman I wanted to kind of highlight, since we're talking about women, is a woman that I happened to catch a documentary on. Anybody heard of Gabe Grunivald? Okay. Oh, one person here. Her story is absolutely amazing. So she's a rare cancer advocate. She is a professional runner, and she's an internal optimist. Now, in this picture, she's actually running in the 3,000 meters in the World Championships, and you'll notice a big scar on her stomach. That was from one of the surgeries that she had in cancer. But let me back up and tell you a little bit about her story. Imagine being a fifth-year student in college, and now a lot of athletes do that because they can run, compete longer. And so she's probably 23 years old, 22, 20, and she gets this diagnosis from a doctor that she has a form of cancer for which there is no cure. I don't know how I would have responded at such a young age to these really terrifying news. But the interesting thing about Gabe is, just like the vines, she went deeper. She allowed it to form her character, and she actually became a better runner after that diagnosis. So she keeps going, and she becomes a professional runner in 2010, which means, she had sponsors. She has to be good to do this. And then 2011, she's third nationally in the mile. Having been a runner myself, that's just a phenomenal accomplishment. And this is while she's undergoing chemotherapy and cancer treatments. And then a year later, she becomes an All-American in the 1,500 meter and places fourth in the Olympic trials, which means one seat from going to the Olympics. Pretty amazing. 2013, she marries the love of her life, another runner, Justin, who then becomes a doctor. And she actually gets even better at the 1,500 in 4 minutes, 1.48 seconds. Amazing, amazing time. And then between 2014 and 2017, cancer reoccurs 3 times. And often she would be in these experimental things, and what she would do after having her treatment is go out and run. go through something really harsh on your body and go out and run. And during that time, she continues to compete, and eventually makes the world championships in the 3,000 meters. It's amazing. Now, by now, she's a celebrity, and other rare cancer people are contacting her, and they're struggling, and she's an optimist, and she's saying, I'm going to live life as long as I can. And so she starts the Brave Like Gabe Foundation, and it takes off, it starts helping people. Now, unfortunately, she lost her battle with cancer in 2019. But I want to say in those 10 years, she lived life, didn't she? And she left an incredible legacy. So that's kind of the standard we could hope to be with challenges that inevitably will come in life. And so I want to take this press-on method, which I've developed, which is basically an acronym that you can apply should you be facing a difficulty in your life. It basically stands for perspective, relationship, engage, seek, strategize, overcome, and never quit. Perspective. By that, I mean the idea that you have to take a long view at life and not become overwhelmed by a difficulty or a crisis, because they will come and they will go. Eventually, this pandemic will be behind us, but something else will come in the future. If you've lived as long as me, you know this. And I think I chose this picture because I've found in my life that a lot of times you're going in one direction and then something happens and then you may have to make a turn. And sometimes it's an abrupt turn. But if you keep pursuing it, you do eventually get forward and you can get to the summit. And the important thing is to remember how we view a difficulty. When I spoke last year virtually for InfoComm, I talked a little bit about the word crisis, if any of you remember that. And crisis in Chinese has two characters. One means risk, and the other means opportunity. Perspective allows you to see the opportunity within the difficulty. And that's what you have to see when something happens. I wanted to share with you where I started learning perspective. Now, when you go to the academy, the first 7 weeks of your life is something called Cadet Basic Training, which we refer to affectionately as Beast Barracks. So it kind of tells you a little bit about it. And it is a very intense time, both physically, emotionally, psychologically, especially for a woman at that time. So not only are you learning all the military jargon and being stressed physically, you're also ostracized. So it's a cauldron of an experience. And one of the things we learned during Beast Barracks is bayonet assault kind of commands. So we would practice in the heat of the summer with our rifles initially with a bayonet on top, and we would learn a series of slash and smash series and commands that we would practice over and over. And eventually we graduate to pugil sticks, which you can see in this picture. It's basically a long, you can see with pillows, a long rod with pillows on it on the end, and then we would practice with one another. And I can still remember my roommate Tracy and I trying to be aggressive, be like warriors. In other words, we're learning hand-to-hand combat. And we just didn't get it. You know, we're like turning our backs and getting in trouble because we didn't know how to go after and hit each other. But through practice, we got better and we got better, especially when we would imagine that we were going after the Navy goat. Then I got really excited about it. So, you know. But it was all to prepare us for the bayonet assault course, which took place at Camp Lake Frederick. It's at the very end of Beast Barracks. We have a forced road march, 12 miles. We set up bivouac. We have pup tents. And then we're going to do the bayonet assault course as well as a bunch of other tests that you have to pass. And I remember the night before, even though we had put our pup tent together and dug a little thing, a trench around it, it rained. And it got into the tent. And of course, we have to sleep with our rifles. So me and my roommate, we're wet, we're cold, and the next day we have this bayonet assault course. Now the reason we're also afraid is rumor has it that all our opponents on this course are Army football players. Yes. And so as you can see, I'm 5'2", and at the time I was a skinny little runner. I was about 100 pounds, and I've got to go up against football players. And to make matters worse, it's raining when it starts. I'm already cold and shaking, and the first part of the course is completely up a deep ravine, a very steep ravine that we get to the top, and we know that there's going to be several people we have to fight along the way, as well as go over obstacles and under and everything like that, and complete it. And so I'm so intimidated by this, but you know, you don't get out of some tests in life, right? You just don't. So I start on my way up this hill, and I can just, the mud is just coming down, the gullies are coming down and of gushes of water, and I get halfway up and I fall and slip and hit my knee, and I just keep going. I get to the summit, and then there's this burly 200-pound football player looking at me. And he says, do the slash and smash series. And I try to do exactly what he said, and as soon as I put my bugle stick at him, he threw me on my back, and I land in a pile of mud. And he screams at me to get up, and I go after him again, and he throws me on my back again, and I'm in this pile of goo. And then something happened, and I got mad. It felt a lot like my brother Dave just picking on me. So I said, this is not going to happen anymore. And everything within me, I went after him, and I think I intimidated him, because I surprised him because his eyes were like this. And then he let me go. And then I went to the next one and the next one. I didn't do great on that, but before I knew it, I had finished the course, and I'm shaking. I've used all my energy, and I realized that's what this academy is going to be like for 4 years. It's going to be one test after another, and I can't think of it as 4 years of this. I'm going to have to do this one day at a time. And that's what I think we sometimes miss when difficulties come, to realize they're not going to be here forever, but I might have to do things more simply and break things down. Now, some 25 years later, I learned perspective again, because life gets a little more complicated, right? As you grow and you have more responsibility. And in a 3-week time, I lost a major job, was downsized. I was in a car accident and broke my left clavicle. I even showed you the picture of where they had to put all these screws and everything in me, because my seatbelt, which saved me, broke my collarbone. So totaled that car. And then my daughter Gwyneth, who was just right out of college, was driving, and someone rear-ended her. So I have 2 totaled cars and no job. I've got 3 daughters that are depending on me. I was widowed at the time. So anyway, I'm kind of depressed, because has anybody ever had a broken collarbone? Yes. Is it hard to sleep? Very hard to sleep, because anytime you move, it just hurts. So I'm waking up and I'm kind of depressed, all right? There's a lot of challenge here. And over the years, I had written a lot of leadership curriculum, and I would write off to authors, and often they'd send me a book and maybe something else, and sometimes it was a coffee mug. So I happened to reach up with my good arm, and I reached this coffee mug, and it said on one side, no problem is unique. And on the other side, just work the problem. And that's exactly what I needed at that moment. Yes, being unemployed is a problem, but I had been in job transitions before. I knew what I had to do. Having a broken collarbone is a problem, but I could heal. And I remember that I said, you know, on my other hand, I can type, I can make phone calls, and if I have to drive, I lived in a city that had a lot of tolls around it, and of course my car was totaled, so the Easy Pass was with it, that I could learn to throw with my one arm the coins into the toll booth, and a lot of times I'd miss, but I just kept a lot of coins so I could to do that. And I remember a friend who was also working at that organization, and he wasn't let go yet, and he called me and said, how you doing? I said, well, it's all up from here. And I remember him laughing. He says, only you would say that. I said, well, you know, the idea is either I look down and say I'm done, or I say everything's up from here. And that's what I did. I began to really work the problem, and I would do things that maybe some people wouldn't do. We were let go in the fall. That's always nice, just before the holidays. But I just kept working it and working it. And I remember I even had a really crucial meeting, a networking meeting, with a potential person I would partner with on New Year's Eve. Now, a lot of people would have taken that day off, but I was like, I got to work the problem. I'm just going to work the problem. And it ended up being a really good arrangement where we won a contract for 5 years, and I was good to go. So you got to work the problem. Everything is temporary. That's perspective. The other thing is our next step is this idea of relationships. Especially when we're in difficulty, we want to go deep and wide with our relationships because it helps us psychologically, emotionally, and socially. And so I think you can reach out initially to your family, and I'm sure that was challenging. It certainly was in my family because they're all over the country. But going deep with your family can often provide that support you need when you're facing something that seems insurmountable at the time. For me, as a believer, my faith community was a huge component of how I've gotten through difficulties in life. And then finally, your local community. I remember getting to know my neighbors in a deeper way during COVID and finding how supportive they truly were of anything that we were facing. And so it kind of minimized what maybe I was going through to see what others were struggling with. And as an example, Jennifer Goodyear, as we've already heard, she had her family-owned business totally disrupted by COVID. And to make matters worse, she felt incredibly isolated because she was not able to meet with her chapter, her local AVIXA chapter. And she was pregnant, and morning sickness was just a huge component of her day-to-day living. Plus her husband works as an emergency nurse during COVID, so you can imagine the stresses there. And so what did she do? She decided to begin a book club. And I was so honored that my book was chosen to be the first book club and to have that experience with those women. This is at the height of COVID. It was probably one of the more enriching things that I did. But Jennifer shared that she now has friends as a result of this book club where they've studied other books with literally people all over the world. And what a great way to go deeper, to establish relationships even with the circumstances that she faced. And then she was blessed with her beautiful daughter, Olivia. So there's her picture. We also want to engage. And what I mean by that is I think there is a tendency with women to focus on others so much that we don't articulate what our needs are. I'm seeing some people, yeah. And so when we engage with others, we have to be authentic. We have to sometimes be a bit vulnerable in saying, this is not working for me, I need some help here. And sometimes you have to look kind of deeply. In the past, during the pandemic, I've now coached 4 professional women. 2 are West Pointers, amazingly equipped women, but they've struggled. And one of the things I've worked probably the most with them is on this idea of being clear on what their needs are and articulating that in a way that it can be received by people, whether it's a boss or people around them. So you have to be real, you have to be authentic, because that'll make the relationships deeper. As an example, Lainey Materas did something quite unique. Now, her sales became completely virtual, and she used some really unique ways of engaging her clients. But one of the benefits of not being on the road so much is she could attend her son's soccer games. And once she was sitting there, getting to know another mother, and the mother shared with her that she couldn't feed her children. Here's someone that she lived in the same community, and because of COVID, was really struggling. And Lanny realized, I've got to do something. So she started a volunteer organization completely from scratch to meet the food scarcity issues related to her community. It even went so far as providing furniture to some of the most destitute in her community. And from that, I think she gained so much empathy and understanding that it made maybe her problems seem less important, but also she created this following of 3,600 people on Facebook, this Facebook group that she started, all because she was listening for the needs around her and building and engaging in those needs. The next two things that I recommend after you've done what I've suggested up to this point is to seek and strategize. By seeking, you want to surround yourself with the best people that you know to help you solve the problem that you're looking at. So for me, when I have early on in my career transitioning out of the military, I hired a career coach so that I would be able to know how to get into corporate America. I didn't have that experience. No one in my family did. So I couldn't look to people that didn't have the answer to help me with something. So you have to be wise enough to say, what is it I need and who could give me that expertise? So you want to do that. And then working with that person or people or resources such as this council, you develop a plan. And one of the things that you have to be willing to do is to adapt that plan. You may go down this route. You think as best you know, this is the way we should solve this particular issue. And if it doesn't work out, you pivot. And that is really what life is about. It's about a lot of these pivots. And you perfect it over time. And I have found that in my life, that is the way that you press on by seeking and strategizing. So any of you recognize Mary Cook, a member of the council. And what she did is, again, she was in sales and all of a sudden things changed. And now she's much more aware of what's going on in her community. And what she found was people that really love their animals were having to give them up. They could not care for them. They could not provide for them. And she said, this is really detrimental to people's psychology, to their ability to cope with all the uncertainty of COVID. And so she created this pet mutual aid society in her local area. She organized and strategized a bunch of volunteers so that they could meet those needs. So it was pet medicines and pet supplies, and they got them donated and then distributed. And she's built such a large organization that they can handle 120 requests a week. And she said through this, she had such an amazing experience understanding what people really need and how important their pets really are to their well-being. And it gave her a lot of empathy in her area. But it wasn't simple. And I think it gave her perspective on what she was going through. The last two steps in Press On is this idea of overcoming and never quit. It's been my experience that I'll start out on a way of addressing a particular issue, and another issue will come up. You know, it was one thing in my situation of losing the job, but then I also had to figure out 2 new cars and figure out all the new insurance and such, and even work through getting a ticket after I broke my collarbone. That was real fun. Anyway, the point is new issues will always arise, so don't be surprised by them. I think sometimes we think, oh, life should be easy. Well, no, there's going to be a challenge here. And when you get used to it, you're more likely to be able to overcome it. And don't give up too quickly. You have to lean in and persist. Now, a AVIXA woman who really had, of all the women that I talked to, had the most challenging time during COVID is Chrissy Sarah. And so she lost a job she really loved. And that's really hard. It's one thing to lose a job you don't like, but when you really like a job, it's hard. And she had a troubled marriage, and it ended in divorce. So 2 major life changes, all happening in a short period of time. But she did something that I thought was really brilliant and very humble of her. It might have felt like she was going backwards instead of going forwards. And what she did is she moved back in with her family, with her parents. And that gave her access to her horses, which was very therapeutic to her. And then she went through this process of reinventing herself. And she said, you know, I decided what I liked and what I didn't like in a job and what I was willing to do and what I would not do. It actually gave her a deal of clarity for what she was looking for. And as a result, she got a job that she thoroughly loves now. And she's on to new and better paths. You can see by that smile. But in hearing her story, it reminded me of this gentleman that you may recognize, former SEAL Team 6 leader, Ryan O'Neal, who is credited with killing Osama bin Laden, the architect of 9/11. And I heard this podcast and I thought, oh, this is what he did. And so when he decided to sign up for basic underwater demolition SEAL training, or BUDS training, to become a Navy SEAL. He was kind of a fat guy, and he really didn't have a lot of the abilities he thought he could. So he's a bit intimidated, like I was, going up that Bayonet assault course. And he had an instructor that said to them, despite what you've heard, the SEALs course, the BUDS SEAL course, is not impossible. And that was really insightful to him as well. And you have to understand that this is the most rigorous military program in the world. Only 20% of the people actually pass. They do thousands of sit-ups and push-ups and burpees, and they run at least 6 miles a day just to get their meals. They swim in the ocean. It's incredibly intense. And so what did the guy tell him to do? He said, I will never ask you to do something that's impossible. I will ask you to do something that's very hard today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day for 8 months. But I will never ask you to do something that's impossible. He says, but I don't want you to think about it as 8 months of that. Instead, all I want you to think about is I want you to get up on time, immediately make your bed perfectly, and brush your teeth, and celebrate 3 victories. You did that. Then you're going to get to physical training on time, and we're going to beat on you, and it's going to be hard. But all you're going to think about is your next goal is to get to breakfast. And then you're going to go through some really hard things, and then you're going to do lunch. And then your next goal is dinner. And then finally back to that perfectly made bed. And he said, you know, that's how I did it. That's how I got through BUDS, that led me on the potential to be this Navy SEAL that was ready at the right time to have the mission to kill Osama bin Laden. But he said, going back to what that instructor said, it's an incredible thing to see as a life lesson. That what if you knew at the beginning of your life that you were going to do some really hard things, but they weren't impossible? You're going to do something hard, but you were going to figure it out. And sometimes you just have to break it down into smaller things that you have to do so you can be successful. The other thing he said is, when you want to quit, tell yourself it's your emotions talking. Say to yourself instead, I'll quit tomorrow. I love that. So when you're faced with difficulty and it's really overwhelming, something as extreme as Gabe, or you've lost a job, or something very challenging in your life, choose to quit tomorrow. So what I want you to remember the next time you're pressed is the lessons we can learn from the vintner, that the best grapes, the best tasting wine come from nutrient-deprived soil, bunched together, pruned harshly, very little water, and fertilized by crap. Next time you're facing that, I want you to remember to keep your perspective, that change will eventually be different. Things will be different, that you can look forward to something that may not be achievable now, but eventually you'll get through it. Go deep with your relationships. Engage with people. Tell them and be authentic with what you need. Seek the best people to help you solve problems. Strategize, but be willing to pivot if you have to. And always remember that you will have obstacles, but you can overcome them if you choose to never quit. Instead, quit tomorrow. Thank you so much. It has been so an honor to be here. For those that are watching streamed, we have a Kindle version of my book available to you at a reduced cost. And my audiobook is now available. For those of you that are, audio, rather listen to books, and I go through a ton of books this way. I'm real excited about this. It's been a labor of love, but it's got music. It's really another level of learning in terms of putting a book like that together. And then just for this audience alone, anybody on there that would be interested in a mastermind, I'm offering it only to AVIXA women for a reduced cost of $99. So if you'll just go to this link, I'm going to leave this up for a while, and want to join it, we will begin this in early 2022, and I will put some very exciting women in there as well so that you can grow and go deeper and do some of this press on even as we do a mastermind. So thank you again. It's been such a privilege to be here. And again, meet me out there and I'll send your book.